Ridley Scott's new film All the Money in the World hit the headlines when its leading man Kevin Spacey was replaced by Christopher Plummer after the former was accused of being a serial sexual predator. But the true story that the film depicts, the kidnapping of the grandson of the richest man in the world, dominated the news during 5 months in the 1970s. John Paul Getty III, the 16-year-old grandson of oil magnate and billionaire J. Paul Getty Sr., was kidnapped in Rome, Italy on July 10, 1973. Take on, John Paul Getty III, grandson of oil billionaire J. Paul Getty, pictured at a party hosted by Andy Warhol in 1976, was kidnapped and held for ransom for 5 months. Film, Christopher Plummer as J. Paul Getty and Mark Wahlberg as his advisor and former CIA operative Fletcher Chase in All the Money in the World. Real, Gail Harris announces to the press in Rome on July 17, 1973, that the disappearance of her son. Film, Michelle Williams and Mark Wahlberg in the film. His grandfather Getty Sr., played by Christopher Plummer in the film, had made his fortune drilling for oil in the early 20th century, ultimately setting up Getty Oil Incorporated in 1949. By 1966 he had a personal wealth of $1.2 billion, more than $8.8 billion today, making him the world's richest private citizen. John Paul Getty III grew up in Italy where his father, John Paul Getty Jr., had been working for the family oil business. But when Getty Jr. developed a debilitating drug addiction, Getty Sr. cut the family off, including John Paul Getty III, known as Paul, and his siblings. Getty Jr. eventually remarried and moved to England, but young Paul stayed in Rome where he lived a bohemian lifestyle, reportedly selling paintings and trinkets to make a living. In July 1973, he was kidnapped by a group of men, some of whom had connections to the Calabria drug crime syndicate, and they soon contacted the Getty family demanding $17 million. Stingy, despite the fact that Getty Sr. was the richest man in the world at the time, he refused to pay the $17 million ransom for the teenager, and the kidnappers thought his family was lying because they could not believe a grandfather could be so heartless. Saved, John Paul Getty III with a police officer after his kidnapping in Italy, the scarring from where his ear was cut off clearly visible. No going back, John Paul Getty III soon became addicted to drugs and alcohol after the kidnapping ordeal and eventually overdosed aged 25, leaving him severely disabled. Getty Jr.'s drug addiction was so severe that he was unable to deal with his son's kidnapping, and it fell upon Paul's mother Gail Harris, played by Michelle Williams in the film, to negotiate with the kidnappers to try to free their son. Ms. Harris contacted Getty Sr., who flat out refused to pay the ransom, arguing that if he even paid a penny in ransom for one of his 14 grandchildren he would soon have 14 kidnapped grandchildren. In spite of a letter from the teen and a phone call in which the kidnappers threatened to sever one of their hostages' fingers, Getty Sr. kept refusing to pay for his return. One of the kidnappers who had been dealing with Miss Harris is said to have exclaimed that he could not believe that the richest man in the world would refuse to pay money for his grandchild's safety.